Good evening to our podcast tonight called Learn to Teach Us to Succeed. Tonight we are looking at an interesting concept which I call the importance of hands-on activities in science and math education. I'm going to focus on what I do in science class, in my French class, and it's applicable to the math class and any other topics you are teaching. I think that would be a great way to look at it. If you don't know me, my name is Alain Faber. I've been teaching for more than 25 years, and I do this podcast sharing ideas that I know about teaching, things I love to think about, ways to help students, teachers, and also talking about my favorite topics, which is about learning, teaching, and leadership. So this is part of what we're doing here tonight. I'm going to double check to make sure that we have sound, so we are ready to go. So I was looking at the best way to approach this idea of hands-on activity, and we all know why hands-on is important. But I'm going to bring some ideas beyond that. So I was going through my paperwork. It's the end of the semester, and I came up with two graphs, and I figured I'd use them tonight. One is the Bloom's taxonomy, which was updated in 2001 with two gentlemen, and the two gentlemen were Anderson and Cratois, as well as another information that I called the knowledge dimension. So these are the two parts I'm going to talk about. I'm going to put at the end of this podcast the two links at the bottom, or three links, so you can have a look yourself. But when we look at, if you've been to the Teachers College, you know about Bloom's taxonomy. If you are a student, you may not know what it is, but when you do activities in your class, you are using it weekly, daily, and more often that you can think of. So tonight, I'm going to divide this podcast in three parts. One is about learning and the learner's perspective. Second is about teacher's perspective. And the other one is about leadership and how all of this work together. And it's kind of interesting to see the topics in the big picture. So first of all, if you've watched and listened my podcast, you know that I love science and I do love labs. I like to do hands-on activities. I think that's the best way for students to have a better understanding for what they need to learn. If we are learning a language, for example, I teach French as well, what the students need to know, what they need to do is, once they have some idea of vocabulary, then we look at the conversational skills. We also look at how can they use their French or their new language to communicate ideas. And more than just communicating ideas so that they are understood. If you're in math, that's the same thing. You can learn math in all its angles. But once you realize that you can apply math to real-world problems, you can use it in engineering in a whole bunch of different ways. What happens is that you have a new dimension to what you're learning, and that makes it more interesting. So if we're looking at the basic Bloom taxonomy, there are 6 basic steps, and they are like this. So if you think of it as a pyramid, at the bottom you have what we call remembering. And then second step, we have understanding. So the first one is it's about words and ideas and facts. You need to know the concepts. Once you have a knowing of the words and what it is, then you need to understand what you can do with that information. So once you remember words, you can describe, you can tell stories, you can find let's say a definition and a vocabulary word. If you know, the next step being understanding, is when you can discuss or you can explain to others information from what you know. And in order to be able to share with others what you know, you need to understand the concept. So there you go. The third step is about applying. Once you know the topic and you understand what to do with it, then you can apply it to different concepts. So this is often what I call my labs. When we know about, let's say in chemistry, we learn about compounds. We understand that we have different elements coming together to create compounds, and then you can apply it so we can mix two chemicals, and then we can see a reaction. So we can apply what we know. But at this point, we're just on the third level of understanding a concept. The next one is about analyzing. Once you can apply your concepts, when you can apply your ideas and what you are working on, then you can start analyzing. You cannot analyze, let's say, a novel, for example, if you don't know the language. You cannot analyze the data of an experiment or in a given field of study if you don't know the word and you don't understand what's happening. So analyzing allows you to identify variables, compare two ideas, explain what you mean. And this is kind of very exciting because you can use what you've learned, you can understand it, you apply it, and then you analyze to come up with new conclusion. And that brings us to the fifth level, going up in a pyramid. We're almost to the top, and it's called evaluating. Once you come up with your analysis, then you can evaluate the worth of what you know, the worth of what you understand, the worth of what you apply and analyze. It's quite important because you need to evaluate what you do to know its worth, to know, okay, what's the next step for me? Is it worth for me to proceed? So some people love science and they will continue learning science and so on. And others, they don't want to go into science. They'd rather go into social sciences, for example, or social studies. Evaluating is very important. It allows you to better understand where you stand from your values point of view. And once you are able to evaluate the knowledge you have, to evaluate your understanding, how you apply the knowledge and what you can do, then the sixth level is called creating. At that place, you can create something new. You can imagine something that doesn't exist yet. You could design a lab based on a question you have that you've never tested before, or you can plan something. But you cannot imagine or design anything unless you have a basic understanding of how it goes. So for example, there's some people. So if you look at me and I can have amazing imagination. Let's say you talk to me about a landscape. I can have a mental visualization of what it is. However, if you ask me to draw it, it's not that I can do it. I cannot do it yet. Is that I don't have the skill. I don't know how the colors and different medias work. I don't know how to apply the artistic process. I don't know how to analyze the point of view, the perspective, and evaluate my skills for an outcome. I can do it in science, but I cannot do it in art. And the beauty with Bloom's taxonomy, it goes from this idea that you know the basics to being able to create. Now, let's go back to this idea of why is it important to do hands-on in our science class, language class, math class, and so on. Is that when you start a topic, regardless of the subject, and you share how you can talk about it in facts, this is just one level of understanding. Once you do that, then you need to go to, okay, let's see if I can find the other thing I want to talk to you about. The model of learning called the knowledge dimension. The whole idea here is remembering facts is great, but it doesn't give you a depth of understanding. Once you start understanding what you're working with, then you have a better idea of the concepts that you're working with. So the first one is just facts and ideas. Then he talks about the concepts, and then you'll be able to follow a procedure or a process to get to an end result. And this is all part of how Bloom is discussing that. And at the end, once you know how to put the process together, in Bloom's taxonomy, you have the creative part, but in the knowledge dimension, you have what we call metacognition. And metacognition is how you can reflect on how you can learn. And often we forget to do that with our students, especially at the end of semesters or at the end of a school year. We give them a lot of information, they know about stuff, they can understand it, they can apply it in labs, they can analyze information and evaluate, and even doing some creative aspect of what we do. But if we don't give them a chance to think about how do they learn, how do they remember, how they understand, how they can apply, or how is their analysis process is going, then you're missing out on the fact that they will not know, they won't have as much depth in understanding the next level of, of learning, for example. So the hands-on is quite important because once you learn ideas and facts, you can do hands-on and notice how two things work together. For understanding, doing hands-on allows students to see how two parts are working together and understand the purpose. Once you can do hands-on activity, you can apply the tools or the objects to solve a situation or to respond to something that comes to you. When you analyze, when you have a piece of information or you have an object in front of you or you're doing a lab, you can apply that, but you can also analyze its worth in what you do. So you see, when you think of Bloom's taxonomy, we think of knowledge and ideas and what you input and output. But in hands-on, it's exactly the same thing. Same thing with evaluating. If you are to give an object, you can ask students, once they have a good understanding on the topic, can you evaluate that piece of equipment? Is it the right one? And if not, how could we modify that? It's all part of STEM all the time. And the last part is about creating. Now, the whole thing here with the hands-on activities is that you can give them a chance to use objects that they have and see what else they can do with that. Here's an example. We just finished in December. Often people have some time off. People give gifts to each other, and we have Legos. So if you have a Lego set, here are a few things we can do using Bloom's taxonomy. And here, this is always as the learner's point of view. So when we have Legos in front of us, then you need to remember what Legos are and how they fit together. That's the first thing. Understanding how you can make different shapes with them, that's the second level, once you know how the blocks work. And then once you understand, then you can apply what you know. So that means that you can take the notebook or the guide, and then you can build whatever the set is all about. So this is the first 3 steps. Now, if people have done Legos long enough, they know that if they have a set or two, they can analyze the two and they say, okay, how can I improve on the design from the original Lego set? And that's quite interesting because once they can analyze different sets, they can say, okay, I'm going to take a few parts from different sets to create something different and then create. So here we are using the blocks as a single entities, and then they're creating something new, something that is totally unrelated from the beginning, but there's the process that work through that. And here, if you think of little kids before elementary school, we talk about playing. Just you give them toys and they play. What's the purpose of toys? It's to use the hands-on aspect of learning. And we need to keep in mind that students can learn in all the grades and even adults. And that brings me to my second segment of this podcast about teaching. So how can we apply this Bloom's taxonomy or this knowledge dimension for teachers? Well, it's a bit the same thing. Teachers are people that are sharing what they know. They also guiding students to learn. So they're guiding learning. But the best way to be able to guide learning, it's not to know exactly what the outcome needs to be. Well, when I started as a teacher, I always had lesson plans and I knew when we would start, how we would start. And the whole idea here was at the end, I needed to know what I was going to achieve. It was safer for me and it made me more comfortable. Now, as I got more experience, then it is still part of what I want to do in class, but often I leave a little door open where some unexpected ideas unexpected situation can arise. And that's what makes teaching exciting. So let's see if we can look at this idea here of Bloom's taxonomy and the knowledge dimension. So if you're a teacher, first thing when you finish teacher's college, you try to remember everything you need to remember in the school, in the classroom to make it work. And when it's done, after a couple of days, couple of months, then you have an understanding of how things go. And then you have a good understanding of what teaching can be. Now, once this is done, then you say, okay, let's see if I can attempt and try something new. Once you start trying something new in your teaching career, that means that you're going out of your comfort zone and you are trusting yourself to say, okay, let's see if I can use what I know to apply to different ideas so that then you start building strategies, and then you are playing a little bit more with the teaching. Once you start applying different concepts, strategies to your lessons, what happens is then you start analyzing to look at, okay, what are the things that work well? What are the things that don't work well? What other things can I improve on what I do? Because then analyzing what you learn, new strategies, new ideas, you're learning from your students all the time. Then you start evaluating, saying, okay, these are some of the strategies that I love to use, and this is what works well for me. Now, I'm not saying that at some point you say, okay, these are the only strategies that I want to work with. What I'm saying is that you end up with some ideas of what works best for you and what works best for the different students you've had over the years. Now, keeping in mind that as the years go by, students change. We have also students' mentalities, morals, demography changes around the school. So sometimes you need to adapt. But overall, it's still the same concept. You're looking at what different new strategies, you apply them, analyze them, and evaluate. And then you start saying, okay, how about I can create something new? And creating something new is when you start saying, okay, let's see where it's going to go. Let's see, I don't know what the outcome of a lesson would be, but I do know that I know where I'm starting. I know that we're going to learn something. And together we are, with students and teacher, to achieve learning. And it's important because the Bloom taxonomy is just a process, like a step of how more complex thinking happens. But if you think of the knowledge dimension, the whole idea here is that, first of all, you have the facts of what teaching is. Second, you have the concepts. Okay, I have a curriculum to do. I have a school system to work with. And then, so these are all concepts. It's all up here. And at some point, you need to bring it from here to make it fun for you and others. And then you start working with procedures. So when you have knowledge, the best way to be able to streamline what you do is to have some procedures in place for you to be more comfortable and have more time and energy, but also for students to feel that there is a process in what they do, because there's safety in having a procedure, because people know where they're starting and they know where they are going. And the fourth part of the knowledge dimension is this idea of metacognition. So when you have metacognition, that means that I'm learning how I'm learning. I'm reviewing how I teach so that myself, I'm working towards becoming a better teacher. And all of us can do that in life as well. If some of you saying, okay, if you are in your family and you want to teach your kid cooking, well, it's the same thing. We have the basic facts of what's happening in the kitchen. We've got ingredients and something to cook with. Then from there, we need to say, okay, we can put ingredients together and then we can cook them. These are the concepts to work with. So people know that. But then you have the procedure. Then you have recipes. And once you have your recipe, sometimes you try the first time, it doesn't work. Then second time, third time, things are getting better. And it gets to a point where people say, you know what, the recipe works very well. And then at some point, someone will say, okay, well, knowing how I like to cook, knowing from my experience, what else could I do? How do I cook best? What are the ingredients I work with best? And from there, you can create something completely new. And this is the beauty of growing as part of a field. So I'm talking about teaching here, but it could also be a parent. So when you are a parent, it's the same thing. We know we start at the beginning and we grow as a parent with a family. If you're part of a community, same thing. You could be a new member in a community, or you could be at the head of a community, and the whole thing is the same thing. You know the main idea of what you want to work with, and then you have to decide, okay, what is the thing I need to do, to what are the main thing I need to understand, so I can apply what I know, so that at the end I can have a creative community. Now, it's not necessarily easy to always have a creative community, because some people will say, well, we need innovation, we need to have new ideas, we need to keep it fresh and great. Now, you have to keep in mind that some people that work in the grocery store, for example, and they scan food, this is always the same type of activities. So people need to remember and understand what they need to do and apply what they know. Very little more that needs to happen here. If you're part of a team, when you're a junior engineer or you're junior cook, same thing. You know the basic, and we're going to make sure that you know well about the basics until you get better. Same thing with teaching. And that brings me to the third segment of this podcast, which is about the idea of leadership. Leadership is one of the this concept that I love, because the more I learn about leadership, the more I realize that I don't know much about leadership. So if you look at the Bloom's taxonomy, it's the same thing. I know what leadership is and I remember the key concepts, but from there, I need to understand it better. Now, every time I think about leadership or I read about leadership, I have a better understanding, and it leads to a point where I need to be able to apply my leadership skills. So leadership skills can be done at the family level, in your community. I do it in my classroom. If you have my students, they're teenagers, they can help other students that are younger than them. There's always a leadership portion with everything we do in life. So the whole idea here is that we can easily apply the skills of leadership. But once we want to go beyond that, then we have to say, okay, now that I know what leadership is and I can do some leadership, I can do some leadership roles, what happens then? You have to figure out, okay, how can I be a better leader? And here, the whole idea here is that you're going to start analyzing how you lead, but you will also evaluate what is the best way to lead within your group. So, for example, what does it mean to analyze as a leader? It will be, for example, you identify the strengths and weaknesses of different people in your group. You'll be able to compare some processes that work better than others. You'll be able to explain what are the criteria for success for your team, and you'll be able to categorize what are the most important thing to do to the least important thing to do. And for that, it is one step up from just applying leadership skills. And from there, you need to start evaluating. So that's the next step. And that means that when you need to evaluate is that as a leader, you need to figure out, okay, now that I can categorize what is important and what's the least important, then I need to prioritize where I need to put the resources. And that's not an easy feat, because we don't have all the resources we can have. There's always some limits in times, in money, in human resources. There's something that always needs to be looked into. And for that, you need to evaluate how to do your leadership best. Very nice. And it also includes just to justify why you're making the decisions that you're making. And it brings to the idea where at the top, you are creating leadership. In order to be able to create leadership, that means that you can imagine a culture, you can design a workplace, you can plan with where you want your team to go, where you want your class to go, where you want your family to go. And all of this is following the same process. And in school, we talk about the Bloom's taxonomy. There's different ways of looking at this. I'm using this idea because I saw an interesting graph and I emailed it to myself saying, I need to keep that in mind. And I was looking at my emails today and I saw that. And I thought it was working very well with this idea that the importance of hands on learning in what we do. Oh, look at this. If you want to be a better leader, the best way to become a leader is to do hands on. That means that you need to lead in order to become a better leader. You need to teach in order to be a better teacher. Same way that you need to learn if you want to become a better learner. But all of it, you need to be able to do hands-on, because some ideas that comes to you, it's from somebody else. You need to be able to make knowledge your own. And that's the only way that you can go above, beyond just applying what you know. And that's when people start enjoying learning, people start enjoying teaching, and people start enjoying leading as well. So tonight's topic was indeed the importance of hands-on learning, and I put a twist with this idea that if you look at the Bloom's taxonomy, it tells us not just about knowledge, but how important this whole idea of hands-on activity is. And I also included the knowledge dimension, and the whole idea here is that in order to be able to grow and be let's say, to be able to collaborate and contribute to a group, you need to be able to have experience and know how to learn and know how to solve problems. And the best way to do that is to learn ideas, to be able to apply the ideas. In order to do that, hands-on is important. We have little kids do it all the time. We have bigger kids doing that all the time. Let's everybody, small kids, big kids, adults, everybody enjoying life a little bit more by doing stuff. On this, I will wish you an excellent day. Thank you very much for being here today, and I will see you next week for the next podcast. On this, take care.